and where I think the war will go next, where it's likely to go next. This is the man who really has Netanyahu by the short and curlies. Itamar Ben-Gvir, total fanatic settler, sort of lawyer who represented settler terrorists throughout his career, and is a acolyte of Meir Kahane, the late genocidal rabbi. It doesn't matter if you get the translation or not. Just watch the exchange, because he is making a point that is constantly made. Look at the anchor.
ככה זה צריך לעבוד. אני אגב לא אומר את זה רק כאן, הם התחננו אלינו. ככה זה צריך לעבוד. אני אגב לא אומר את זה רק כאן.
What he's saying is there are over 100,000 people displaced in northern Israel, and none of them can go back unless we wage an all-out war on Hezbollah, destroy Hezbollah. Otherwise, our northern communities will never come back and Israel's borders will have shrunk. So this is where they're going to take things in the next few months. I don't know if that will happen, but that's where they're taking things because, again, the U.S. refuses to impose a ceasefire.
And the Biden administration is claiming that they're opposed to that. Like they put out all these leaks, putting out the impression that Biden has stopped Netanyahu from attacking Lebanon. I don't know if that's true or not. I doubt it. I would assume Netanyahu would resist calls to attack Lebanon because he knows that Hezbollah can fight back, and they don't like fighting people who can fight back. But certainly Itamar Ben-Gvir doesn't think that way. He just wants to kill all the Arabs that he can. And they can't stand the sight of a deterrent existing on their border and forcing their own people to flee the way that they make people flee from their homes throughout Israel's entire history. They can't stand that. And so that the fact that you have this Hezbollah force that is a deterrent to Israeli hegemony, they can't live with that. And so that's why he's so obsessed with fighting it. But if they do that, Hezbollah can fight back, and Hezbollah can strike deep into Israel. And there's got to be some people in the Israeli establishment who know that.
And I mean, the loss of land contravenes the messianic philosophy of these heretical Third Temple cultists who see the land of Israel as inextricably linked to the fulfillment of messianic prophecy, which is absolutely the polar opposite of traditional, real Orthodox Judaism.
It's like ISIS. It's like we're dealing with ISIS, as you call them, JSOL, the Jewish state in Israel and the Levant, except they have nuclear weapons. So we're dealing with ISIS, but with nuclear weapons, and they're Jewish. That's pretty much who we're dealing with here.
So Israel's technically, at least momentarily, lost land. No one can really be in northern Israel or the southern communities. So they have to not only take that back, they have to take Lebanon, they have to take Gaza, and pro-settler architectural firms are putting forward plans for settlements in the northern Gaza Strip, which is just insane, and it's never going to happen, or I doubt it will happen, because I don't see Israel actually achieving victory in Gaza as they imagine it. But those are the people that when the U.S. deals with Netanyahu, that's what they're dealing with, because they hold complete control over his coalition. Netanyahu's the kind of guy who's, I think, from what I know about his career, yes, he's a Zionist. He's dedicated his life to the Zionist project, but he's so self-centered and egotistical. If the U.S. actually brought Israel to its knees, which it would be capable of doing, as it did when it sanctioned apartheid South Africa, Netanyahu would actually consider being de Klerk just to gain international fame. Oh, well, I could get the Nobel Prize. I mean, maybe. It'll never happen, or I doubt that day will come, but it's who he is. And so he's that same person is capable of catering to Ben-Gvir. Netanyahu's not religious.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But it just all goes back to Washington and one of the worst administrations in U.S. history.
I mean, and there's so many opportunities for the Biden administration to stand up to Netanyahu. He openly mocks them. He has for years. There's that clip, I think it's from 2002 or the early aughts, where he goes to visit a settlement and he brags about how he like manipulates the U.S. and how easy it is to manipulate. So it's like, if they wanted to make him a bad guy, like the fall guy for their shift in policy, the Biden administration could do that. If they had any sense, but they just don't. I mean, Biden's aides talk about how he has a personal attachment to Israel, which means he just lets Israel do whatever Israel wants. But if the Biden administration wanted to shift gears, I mean, this is Netanyahu. He's the guy who came to Washington to undermine Obama when Obama was trying to do the Iran nuclear deal. So even their own base doesn't like Netanyahu. It would be so easy to turn on him, but so far there's no sign of Biden doing that.
And we talk about the 14,000 shells again and again that Biden and Blinken fast-tracked to Israel without congressional approval. Here's what happened to some of those shells very recently. And this is a video released by Israeli soldiers on TikTok. These shells were signed. Mike Pence signed one of these shells. He went to Israel to sign them. Let's play that again. I mean, I think like the State Department should be forced to respond to this. Like Israeli soldiers are hosting furry conventions, firing American 155 millimeter shells into built up refugee camps in Gaza, dressed as dinosaurs for fun. And they refuse to do a ceasefire. I mean, I can't. They're mocking human life. They're mocking like your normal sense of humanity is just forced into a state of revulsion when you watch that. But they think that's funny. It's hard to articulate what a sick society that is, and we are giving them the tools to continue to deepen their sickness. And that's what inspired the image that I used for this to promote this stream, in case people were wondering why a dinosaur was on a tank. So it's the furry convention genocide. You would have thought they would have stopped putting those videos out after they became Exhibit A in the South African case that Israel's committing genocide, but they just can't stop. They can't help themselves. Yeah.
And you documented all this in your book, Goliath, which, is just an exhaustive review of what a sick society Israel has become. And that's what happens when you're an occupier. It corrupts your soul. I mean, that's what it was founded on dispossession. And that's the inevitable result when you believe you're entitled to land that's not yours and you believe you're superior to its indigenous people. This was sort of the inevitable trajectory, but it's just to see it now. It never ceases to be it's like what you can't get your head around what's wrong with these people. It's just so sick.
Yeah. Did you see like the Zionism is sexy?
Yeah.
Hashtag.
Yeah.
Is this sexy?
There's a stranger in my bed. There's a pounding in my head. Glitter all over the road.
Great music, by the way. This is Israeli culture.
DJ passed out in the aisle. Bobby's on the barbecue. This is Ricky all about. Pictures of last night.
Oh God.
I'm scrolled.
This is a form of torture.
It's a black blood, but I'm pretty sure it rolled. Yeah. Last Friday night, can we?
Aren't you glad your tax dollars are paying for this?
Last Friday night, yeah, we mixed our credit cards. I got kicked out of the bar, so we hit the boulevard.
Yeah, genocide is fun. That's the culture that we're paying to sustain in the Middle East. Palestinians are doing Debka, and that's what Israelis are doing. What the hell is that? And I mean, they're just bragging about committing genocide. They're just boasting about it. And the US is saying, oh, the case is unfounded. I can't think of any war there was some, ugly stuff that came out of Iraq, but it was like passed on to Seymour Hersh on a like a disc on key on a little drive.
Yeah.
The Abu Ghraib photos. This is just like what the Israelis want each other to see and want us to see.
Yeah.
We're being robbed, man. $4 billion a year for that. And Biden and Blinken are saying the same stuff Trump is saying, that they're creating jobs. We're creating jobs by having Israelis and the Ukrainians buy those weapons from us.
Yep.
Continuing on the line of a sick society. I mean, there are, when I wrote my book Goliath, which you just brought up, my guides to Israeli society were Jewish Israelis who had educated themselves out of Zionism and wanted their society to be demilitarized. They'd given up on the U.S. kind of rescuing them. And so they were taking on the work themselves, and many of them had become teachers, and they were counseling youth on how to get out of military service. But most of them were working in education. And that's a very challenging job in Israel. So Meir Baruchin is an Israeli teacher in Tel Aviv who had gone on Facebook and criticized the Israeli assault on Gaza and the brutalization of common civilians in Gaza. He was accused of treason. He's been jailed by the Israeli state for those Facebook posts. This is in the Jewish and Democratic society that we revere. And he was finally returned to his job. And here's what happened. When Meir Baruchin, one of the few Israelis who's able to see the humanity in Gaza, here's how students treated him. They're calling him a son of a whore. They all have cell phones and are trying to humiliate him. So we have a documentary coming out about Meir Baruchin and other Israelis who are resisting from within that Jeremy Lafredo filmed when he was there. It'll be out soon. But he's not alone. Other teachers who have just basically stated their opposition to the war on social media have been suspended, threatened with imprisonment. Here's what happened to an Israeli principal who said, we need to be careful. There are elderly and women and children in Gaza. We shouldn't kill them. This is what happened when she was returned to her school in Tel Aviv. The students rioted against her. They're basically mob attacking her. They're dropping water balloons on her from the windows. The same kind of ritual humiliation. Her name was Yael Ayalon. So, I mean, there are Israelis who are trying to resist, and this is how mainstream Israeli society, and especially the youth, who are more fascistic than their parents, consistently, the younger Israelis are, the more fascistic they are, especially after October 7th, that'll be the case. This is how they're treated. And I truly believe this is a result of American impunity because they face no consequence for behaving like this. They're just rewarded again and again with our money, and we have no say,
Well, let's look at a new illustration of U.S. Impunity for Israel. The State Department spokesperson, Matthew Miller, was asked this week about Israel blowing up yet another Gazan university.
Well, let's watch the university get blown up.
Okay.
I mean, this is Israel University.
It's in the it's in the footage here.
Okay.
I got it.
Occupied and destroyed the Israel University in Gaza. I mean, this is probably number 10 of all 10 universities.
The side Arakat.
This
sorry.
This department of this government
got his name
as
wrong.
a legitimate target.
So I can't speak to this individual action. I don't have independent information to verify that, but I can say that we continue to urge Israel to avoid damage to critical infrastructure. That would, of course, include universities, and to ensure the protection of humanitarian and medical sites. That has been something we have urged from the outset of this conflict. It is very difficult. And again, I'm not talking about this particular site because I don't have information about this particular site, but it is always difficult when you see Hamas use those civilian sites to hide its fighters, to launch attacks on Israel.
But there seems to be no evidence that there were any fighters, in fact, any presence of any kind of military presence in the university itself. I mean, you keep saying that you want Israel not to destroy the infrastructure, yet we have seen almost the total destruction of all infrastructure, including schools, hospitals, roads, cemeteries. They just, they excavated a cemetery, for instance, and took bodies. I mean, this is not exactly tell us in any way that the government of Israel is really paying heed to what you tell them, in any way, by any measure. They're not listening to you.
So we have seen them take some steps to add civilian infrastructure to deconfliction sites. There are other things that we have urged them to do that we want them to do better on. It is an ongoing conversation between our two governments, and something that the secretary spoke directly with the leadership of Israel in his trip last week. But again, there is also this problem that Hamas does continue to hide in and under civilian infrastructure. So when you see a strike against any one piece of civilian infrastructure, to assess the validity of that strike, you have to know what it is that was there, and we don't always know that. At least I don't know that when I'm speaking from here.
Based on Saeed's question.
So you get the picture. I mean,
There's a validity to it, possibly.
I mean, the problem is like the underlying premise, which is false, of his argument, is that Israel has the right to fire on a Hamas target inside of Gaza because Hamas is some kind of threat to Israel. Again, Israel's the occupying power. We're not talking about two countries having a war over some dispute. We're talking about Hamas being a resistance movement, resisting the occupation of its territory, and you don't have the right to just bomb people who are resisting your military occupation. You only have the obligation to end your military occupation. And even the questions about civilian targets sometimes overlook that. Even if Hamas had its headquarters underneath that university, which of course they didn't, but even if they did, it wouldn't give Israel the right to bomb it.
That's Saeed Arakat, by the way, one of the few critical reporters in the briefing room. And you can hear Matthew Miller state that I don't know what was under there. Like, I don't know what was in the basement.
Yeah.
Can you imagine him saying that for a target in Ukraine? Like, Russia is striking military targets in Ukraine.
Yeah.
But they say everything's a civilian target there. But a university was blown up, a private university owned by a businessman with no connection to Hamas. They're deliberately blowing up hospitals, destroying every institution, trying to make life, trying to deprive everyone in Gaza of a future. We just released a short documentary at the Grayzone. It's on our YouTube channel, Telegram, Twitter, of a child who was born on October 7th, who's living in a tent with his family. His name is Tofan Asfour, but his name doesn't officially exist because he can't get registered in the civil registry. He's never had a home. He's never known a day of peace. And where will he go to school? All the schools have been blown up. And that is the point. They don't want people in Gaza to be educated because then they can be engineers. They can actually resist in a much more sophisticated way. They don't want Rifat al-Arir to be alive. They don't want them to be like him. So that's the point of this. And Matthew Miller's saying, well, the point is Israel probably knew there was something naughty in the basement. The universities in Gaza are all really secret Hamas weapons production centers. And so he's consolidating not only the genocide, he's not only justifying or he's deflecting from the genocidal logic, but he's actually justifying Israel's entire military doctrine of destroying all civilian areas. That's, what we're getting from the State Department. It's like they're Israel's lawyer. And it's such sleazy tactics, just because they always attack you if you're in there. Like when I go in there and ask a question, like, does Tony Blinken fear possibly being prosecuted for his implication in this genocide, which is not a hypothetical, because over 50 South African international legal experts or lawyers have put forward a motion to do that. They say, don't use hypotheticals. We're not going to get into the hypotheticals, and you shouldn't either. But here's Matthew Miller hypothesizing that a university was actually a covert military base in order to justify the destruction of a university. Okay, so we've been hitting on three themes here throughout this entire stream. One, Biden's reelection hopes. Two, Netanyahu and his whole concept of from the river to the sea being Israel. And I forget what the third one is because it's been a long stream. But let's just focus on those first two. Oh, well, we showed Douglas Emhoff, first husband, complaining about anti-Semitism. Should anyone who has any moral bone in their body vote for an administration that justifies blowing up universities? On the anti-Semitism question, Douglas Emhoff whining about anti-Semitism, supposed Jewish students who are really just Israel lobbyists in training, whining about feeling unsafe on campus. Does blowing up universities in Palestine make them feel safer? And why don't we just laugh in their faces when we see universities being blown up? How can we not just see the whole passion play at Harvard, MIT, and Penn as a gigantic farce when it's being done to shut down students protesting blowing up universities? And what are those students saying? They're saying from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. While Netanyahu's saying the same thing from an alternate, oppressive, supremacist perspective on national Israeli TV.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this whole scene is just filled with irony.
Rashida Tlaib was censured by Congress for saying from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. And she's saying it from a point of view of equality for everybody, liberating Palestine from this insane regime. Netanyahu says it in the name of controlling all of Israel and Palestine. And this guy celebrated. He's backed up with billions of dollars worth of weapons. And of course, Congress will never be censuring him. They'll only be voting to block any scrutiny for the crimes he's committing.
From the river to the sea, he actually said west of the Jordan, but the translator said from the river to the sea, which was like a blessing. And that's why I-24 deleted that tweet, but he meant from the river to the sea. Elon Musk actually, didn't Elon Musk say that, use of the phrase from the river to the sea would be punished?
Yep.
And then everyone's sharing Netanyahu saying it.
Yeah.
Netanyahu's not going to be punished.
Yeah.
But from the river to the sea that phrase took down Claudine Gay at Harvard. It took down, what's her name? Liz McGill at UPenn, because they refused to condemn it as genocidal and say that they would ban student groups like Students for Justice in Palestine if they used it. And it was a liberatory phrase.
But they're such dupes and they're such cowards that they accepted the premise from Elise Stefanik, the Republican Congress member, that it is genocidal. Rather than saying there's nothing genocidal about saying from the river to the sea, if you're calling for equality, they accepted the premise that it was genocidal. And they're accepting that false premise and then refusing to condemn it. That did them in. When they could have just said, no, like, your question is a joke because no one there is calling for genocide.
There's an underlying subtext here as well, which speaks to the kind of acceptance of Zionism and the supremacist mentality behind it, and the kind of philo-Semitic mentality, which is, to me, the other side of the on the other side of the coin from anti-Semitism. It's the idea that we can only oppose genocide against Jews and that any removal of Jewish privilege is fundamentally genocidal.
Mhm.
So if there isn't, as Netanyahu would put it, Jewish control between the river and the sea, that is fundamentally genocidal. At the same time, Israel, as the self-proclaimed Jewish state, cannot be accused of genocide simply because it says it's Jewish. That is the logic. I don't have the video in front of me. That was the logic put forward explicitly by the French foreign minister to France's parliament this past week. He said that it is morally obscene for a Jewish state to be accused of genocide simply because of the Holocaust, as though, and this is the philo-Semitic mentality German official Germany upholds and much of Western Europe upholds, which is that Jews are special. Jews are like a special kind of people, and we have to treat them with special privileges. And because of the Holocaust that, they committed, and therefore they can't possibly, this special class of people can't possibly do what they did, which was genocide. They're just too special to be able to do that. And accusing them of it is morally obscene. When I, as a Jew, see Jews as just like everybody else.
Of
We're
course.
capable of, and ironically, Zionism promised to normalize Judaism. And in many ways, in an ironic way, it succeeded. Now we have our own Einsatz group our own neo-Nazi fanatics, our own genocide. Thank you, Zionism.
So in the case of Germany, the thinking is basically because we were once supremacists, now we have to support Israel in being supremacist too, as sort of compensation. That's the thinking. And France, being a collaborator with the Nazi supremacists, they've adopted that as well.
Just give them give them everything. Germany is now fast tracking tank shells to Israel. I think that's a first. They've given Israel Dolphin class submarines. They're giving them tank shells. And you know what it really is in the back of the minds of the German, whether it's the German Greens or the AfD, which worships Israel, the far right party, or the French government. It's that their greatest fear is that there would be a Jewish state in their own midst. And that's what Germany really, if there is to be a Jewish state, I mean, I think the idea of Jewish nationalism is insanity, and it's going to cause cause negative historical consequences for Jews and others, no matter where it is. But if there was to be one, shouldn't it be in Thuringia? Shouldn't it be in Oberammergau, where the Germans staged a passion play where the Jews killed Jesus? And shouldn't it be in Munich, where Hitler had his beer hall putsch? Shouldn't it be in Bavaria? The Germans should have to take that on themselves, but that's their greatest fear, is that the Jews would come there in such large numbers, especially those psychos who are rampaging through Gaza. Nobody wants them in their country. And even in Israel, the enlightened people in Tel Aviv who all go on vacation to Berlin and have second passports, they don't want the settlers anywhere near them. So they just put them over there on the other side of the wall in the West Bank, because they're just complete psychos who just cause damage everywhere they go. So this is why Europe is giving, at its base, Europe is giving Israel, the self-proclaimed Jewish state, everything it wants to commit this genocide, from diplomatic support to munitions to military support, because they're anti-Semitic. It displaces the Jewish problem onto the backs of the Palestinians and makes the Palestinians the indirect victims of the Holocaust.
Yeah.